Right now, somewhere near you, something strong enough to kill you in seconds is choosing not to. A grizzly bear can run faster than an Olympic sprinter. A single bite from a lion can crush bone like a cracker. A great white shark can detect a single drop of blood from nearly a mile away. And yet, every single day, thousands of people walk through forests, swim near sharks, and hike through mountain lion territory, and almost nothing happens. That's not luck. That's a decision being made, over and over, by animals that could easily kill you. So here's the real question. If you're objectively weaker, slower, and less armed than most large predators on Earth, why do they so consistently choose to leave you alone? And more importantly, what happens in the rare cases when that choice breaks down? Let's start with the study that first put hard numbers behind something wildlife researchers had suspected for years. In 2016, a team led by biologist Liana Zanet ran a now famous experiment in South Africa's Kruger National Park. They placed hidden speakers near watering holes, the exact spots where animals are most vulnerable and most alert, and played recorded sounds to nearby wildlife. Sometimes the growl of a lion. Sometimes the ordinary, calm sound of a human voice, someone just having a casual conversation, nothing aggressive, nothing threatening. The results were almost embarrassing for lions. Across dozens of trials, animals fled from the sound of human voices far more often and far faster than they fled from the sound of actual lions, one of the most feared predators on the entire continent. Elephants, animals with almost no natural predators at all, reacted with more alarm to a human voice than to a lion's roar. Leopards, buffalo, and warthogs showed the same pattern. Human voices scattered them faster than the roar of the animal that regularly hunts and kills them. Think about how strange that actually is. In a landscape where lions are apex predators capable of killing almost anything they choose to hunt, the sound of an unarmed person talking casually was treated as more dangerous than the actual physical presence of a lion. Zanet and her colleagues argued that this fear isn't instinctive in the way fear of a lion is. A prey animal doesn't need to learn to fear a lion. That fear is largely built in, refined over millions of years of coevolution. Fear of humans is different. It's learned, and it's learned astonishingly fast, passed down through generations of animals that have witnessed, again and again, exactly what humans are capable of. Because here's what predators have actually observed about our species, whether we think about it consciously or not. Humans hunt in ways no other predator does. We throw spears, fire guns, set traps, and coordinate attacks from a distance, all without ever needing to get close enough for a fair physical fight. To a predator's brain, that pattern doesn't just read as strength. It reads as something scarier, unpredictable, coordinated, long-range danger, the kind you can't outrun or outfight, because it doesn't follow the normal rules of a physical confrontation the animal has evolved to navigate. This idea has a name in ecology now. Researchers call it the human superpredator effect, and the data behind it goes well beyond one study in South Africa. A widely cited global analysis, led by biologist Chris Darrimont, compared the hunting behavior of humans to that of other predators across land and sea ecosystems worldwide. The findings were stark. Humans were found to kill adult prey animals, the reproductively mature individuals other predators typically avoid taking, at rates far exceeding those of any other predator on the planet. Other predators tend to selectively hunt the young, the old, or the weak, individuals that don't threaten the long-term stability of a population. Humans, historically, have done the opposite, targeting the biggest, strongest, most capable individuals, the exact behavior that terrifies a population on an evolutionary level because it removes the animals a species depends on most. Across ecosystems worldwide, researchers have documented that large carnivores tend to avoid daylight hours and human-populated areas far more aggressively than they avoid territory occupied by other large predators, even predators capable of directly threatening them. In many regions, animals that would normally be active during the day have shifted a significant portion of their activity to nighttime, specifically to reduce encounters with humans. Cougars in parts of North America, for instance, have been documented becoming almost entirely nocturnal in areas with heavy human foot traffic, a dramatic shift from their natural, more flexible activity patterns. That's a remarkable behavioral change. Animals that evolved over millions of years to hunt when it suited their biology, their prey's activity, and the local climate are rewriting their entire daily schedule around avoiding one species. But learned fear only explains part of the picture. There's also something more immediate happening in the exact moment a predator encounters a person face to face. Most large predators rely heavily on a cost-benefit calculation before attacking anything. Is the potential meal worth the potential injury? A porcupine, a buffalo, even prey with horns or tusks can seriously injure or kill a predator during a hunt, and predators are extremely sensitive to that risk, because an injury in the wild often doesn't mean a quick death. It usually means a slow one, from infection, from the inability to hunt effectively while healing, from starvation while a wound closes. Humans complicate that calculation in ways predators haven't evolved clean instincts for. We stand upright, which makes us appear larger and less like typical prey silhouettes most predators are wired to recognize. We make direct, sustained eye contact, a behavior that in the animal kingdom often signals confidence or threat rather than fear, the opposite of how most prey animals behave when confronted. And overwhelmingly, when predators do encounter humans in the wild, the encounter doesn't end in an easy meal. It ends in loud noise, sudden unpredictable movement, or outright retreat from the human, reinforcing, encounter after encounter, generation after generation, that the safer bet is walking away before things escalate. Researchers studying big cat behavior have described this as treating humans like a risky, low-reward target. High potential cost if things go wrong, uncertain payoff even if they don't. In a wild animal's economy of survival, that math rarely favors attacking, especially when far easier, far less risky prey is usually available nearby. Sharks offer a particularly interesting version of this same story because their reputation suggests exactly the opposite conclusion. Marine biologists studying shark attack data, including researchers involved with the long-running International Shark Attack File, have found that the overwhelming majority of shark bites on humans appear to be cases of mistaken identity, not predation. A shark investigating an unfamiliar object in low-visibility water, a surfer silhouetted against the surface, a swimmer's splashing motion resembling an injured fish, often bites once, and then releases almost immediately upon realizing the target isn't what it expected. Fatal shark attacks remain extraordinarily rare worldwide, especially when weighed against how many millions of hours humans spend in the water every single year. If sharks genuinely viewed humans as reliable, easy prey the way they view seals or fish, the numbers would look catastrophically different than they actually do. In other words, even one of the most feared predators on the planet largely isn't hunting you. It's making a quick, often immediate correction the second it realizes what it's actually encountered. Here's where the story gets more unsettling, though, because this entire system of avoidance isn't fixed. It's provisional, built entirely on repeated experience, which means it can also be unlearned. In regions where hunting pressure on predators drops significantly, or where animals become increasingly comfortable around humans due to habituation, wildlife biologists have documented cases where that learned avoidance visibly erodes over time. One of the most well-documented examples comes from bears in areas with heavy tourism and inconsistent food storage practices, such as parts of Yellowstone National Park in the decades before stricter regulations were enforced. Bears that repeatedly obtained food from campsites, vehicles, or garbage without facing meaningful consequences gradually lost the instinctive caution that once kept them away from populated areas. Wildlife managers have a specific term for what happens next: a food-conditioned animal. Once a large predator learns that humans reliably mean an easy meal instead of danger, its entire risk calculation flips, and those are consistently the individual animals responsible for a disproportionate number of dangerous encounters. Which means the safety most people experience around large predators was never really about the animal being naturally harmless. It was about an ongoing unspoken agreement, built from thousands of years of consequences, that gets renegotiated every time a predator's real-world experience with humans changes. This raises an uncomfortable question about how fragile that arrangement actually is. If avoidance behavior can be taught through consistent consequences, it can also be untaught through consistent exceptions. Every time a predator gets an easy, consequence-free interaction with a human, whether it's a bear finding unsecured food or a shark that isn't deterred quickly enough, that single data point chips away, however slightly, at millions of years of learned caution. Biologist Craig Packer, who has spent decades studying lion behavior in Tanzania, has documented similar patterns specifically around lion attacks on humans. His research found that most documented lion attacks weren't random, unpredictable events. They clustered heavily around specific, identifiable circumstances, regions with high poverty and limited access to livestock protection, areas where traditional hunting or herding practices put people in close, repeated contact with lion territory, and periods when natural prey populations had declined, forcing lions into unfamiliar risk calculations they wouldn't normally accept. Remove the predictable structure that normally keeps lions cautious around humans, and the ancient agreement starts to break down in specific, identifiable ways, not randomly, but exactly where the usual deterrents have eroded. So the system holding this arrangement together isn't some universal, hardwired rule written into every predator's brain. It's closer to an ongoing negotiation, continuously reinforced by every cautious retreat and continuously tested by every exception, which reframes the entire situation you're standing in every time you walk through a park, hike a trail, or swim near a coastline. You are not being spared because predators lack the physical ability to hurt you. You're being spared because, generation after generation, animals have learned an uncomfortable lesson about what your species does when threatened, and they've built their entire survival strategy around staying far away from finding out again personally. It also means something slightly more sobering. That safety isn't a fixed law of nature. It's a pattern maintained by consistent behavior on both sides, human and animal, and patterns, unlike laws, can shift when the conditions that built them change. So the next time you walk past a wooded trail and feel completely safe, remember what's actually happening just out of sight. Somewhere nearby, an animal capable of killing you in seconds is very likely watching, calculating, and choosing, quietly and deliberately, to let you pass. Not because you're harmless, because, deep in a memory older than any individual animal alive today, something learned exactly what you're capable of and decided, over and over, generation after generation, that the risk simply isn't worth it. At least, not yet.